He slid the papers across the table like the conversation was already over. The pen followed, landing right on the signature line with a soft click that felt louder than it should have been. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that familiar confident smile on his face, the one he used whenever he thought he was 10 steps ahead of everyone else. "Just sign," he said. "It's routine, a technical update. Doesn't change anything." But something in his voice was off. It wasn't fear, it wasn't doubt. It was impatience, the kind of impatience people get when they're sure you won't question them. I looked down at the papers, then back up at him. The office smelled like burnt coffee and expensive cologne. Late afternoon light poured through the window behind him, casting his face half in shadow. He'd always liked sitting where the light framed him like that, made him look powerful, important. We were partners, that's what everyone said, in business, in life, in assets. At least that's what I had believed. "Why the rush?" I asked calmly. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You always overthink. This is why I handle the operational stuff. You don't need to read all that legal language. It's boring." Boring. I smiled back, slow and polite, the kind of smile women learn to wear when they're deciding whether to speak or stay quiet. "I'll take it home," I said. His smile flickered. "Why?" he asked too quickly. "There's nothing in there. We've done this 100 times. We hadn't, but I didn't argue. "I just want to look it over," I said. "That's all." For a split second, something sharp crossed his face, annoyance, maybe even anger. Then it was gone, replaced by charm like a mask snapping back into place. "Fine," he said, waving a hand like he didn't care. "We need this finalized." I gathered the papers, slit them into my bag, and stood up. As I walked out of the office, my heart wasn't racing. I wasn't scared. I was alert. Because when someone who's always confident suddenly needs you to hurry, it's usually not for your benefit. That night, I spread the contract out on my dining table, page after page of dense language, small print, clauses stacked on clauses. I poured myself a glass of water, took a deep breath, and started reading. Slowly, carefully, not like a wife trusting her partner, but like a woman protecting her future. At first, it looked exactly like he said. Updates, amendments, restructuring language meant to confuse more than clarify. I could see why he assumed I'd skim it, sign it, and move on. He had always underestimated my patience. Halfway through, I felt it, that quiet shift in the room when your instincts sit up straight. I went back, reread a paragraph, then another. I grabbed a highlighter. My pulse stayed steady, but my mind was racing now, sharp and focused. Operational authority, decision-making power, asset control. I read the clause 3 times. Then I read it a 4th. Buried deep in the contract was language that transferred operational control of our shared assets, companies, accounts, properties, entirely to the signing party. Me, once signed. My breath caught, just slightly. I didn't celebrate. I didn't panic. I closed the folder, because before anything else, I needed confirmation. The next morning, I sat across from a lawyer in a quiet office that smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. She adjusted her glasses, flipped through the pages, and grew very still. "Did he draft this?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "And he told you it was routine?" "Yes." She leaned back slowly, eyes never leaving the document. "Well," she said, choosing her words carefully, "this is not routine. This is very clear." Clear. She explained it to me in plain language, no theatrics, no assumptions. If I signed, the power shifted, legally, completely. No loopholes, no ambiguity. He hadn't read his own contract closely enough, or maybe he had and assumed I wouldn't. I walked out of the office with the contract tucked under my arm and a new weight in my chest. Not fear, responsibility, because now I knew something he didn't, And knowledge, once acquired, demands a decision. That evening, he called me twice, then texted, "Did you sign it yet? We're on a timeline. Don't make this complicated." I stared at the screen, then at the contract on my table. All those years he'd spoken over me, made decisions for us, handled things I was told were too complex, too technical, too important for me to worry about. He thought power always announced itself loudly. He was wrong. I picked up the pen, and as the ink touched the paper, one thought settled calmly in my mind. He had no idea what he'd just handed me. Not yet. And when he found out, everything would change. I didn't tell him right away. That was the hardest part. Not the signing, not the waiting, but the restraint. Power feels different when you know you have it, but choose not to use it yet. It sits in your chest, steady and warm, asking you to be patient instead of reactive. I scanned the signed contract and sent it back exactly the way he asked. No note, no questions, no hesitation visible between the lines. His reply came fast. "Perfect. I'll have my team file it." I could almost hear the satisfaction in his voice, the certainty that he just tightened his grip instead of loosening it. He didn't thank me. He never did. Compliance in his mind was expected. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because I felt victorious, but because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't powerless. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. He was suddenly attentive, overly pleasant, checking in more than usual, making comments like, "We're really building something solid here, and I'm glad we're finally on the same page." I nodded, smiled, let him talk, because arrogance makes people sloppy. The confirmation email came on a Thursday morning. Contract executed and filed. I read it twice, then I forwarded it to my lawyer. Her reply was short and precise. "Effective immediately, you now hold operational control." Immediately. That word echoed in my mind as I sat at my desk, the hum of the office around me fading into the background. Phones rang, printers whirred, people moved through the space like nothing had changed. But everything had. I didn't storm into his office. I didn't send a dramatic message. I didn't announce anything at all. I simply began acting within my authority. I scheduled meetings. I requested reports. I paused transactions that never sat right with me. At first, no one questioned it. Why would they? I'd always been part of leadership. I'd just never been allowed to lead. The first crack appeared when a department head hesitated on a directive. "I just want to confirm," she said carefully, "that this is coming from you." "Yes," I replied calmly, "it is." She nodded and carried it out. I made a note of her reaction, not fear, surprise. By Friday afternoon, he noticed. He came into my office without knocking, jaw tight, eyes sharp. "Why was that payment delayed?" he asked, not looking up from my screen. "I put a hold on it," I said. "You don't have the authority to do that." He finally met my eyes. "Yes," I said evenly, "I do." He laughed once, sharp and dismissively. "No, you don't." I swiveled my chair and opened the folder on my desk, the same contract he'd rushed me to sign. I slid a highlighted copy across the table. He skimmed it quickly at first, then slower, then very slowly. I watched the color drain from his face, watched confidence give way to confusion, then to something much uglier, anger. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. "This," I said calmly, "is the contract you drafted. That clause," he jabbed a finger at the page, "that's not what it means." "It is," I replied, "and it's enforceable." His voice rose. "You knew about this?" "Yes." "And you signed anyway?" "Yes." The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were listening. "You manipulated me," he said. I almost smiled. "No," I said quietly, "I read." He stood there, breathing hard, realizing all at once what had happened, that the control he thought he held had shifted without a single argument, without a single raised voice. "This isn't over," he warned. I leaned back in my chair, completely calm. "It already is," I said. He left my office without another word, but I knew him well enough to know this wasn't acceptance. This was the beginning of his panic, and panic makes people dangerous. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt prepared, because the contract wasn't a weapon, it was a mirror, and he was about to be forced to look at himself without the illusion of control to protect him. Power doesn't explode when it shifts. It hums. That's what I noticed over the next few days, the low, constant hum beneath everything. Conversations changed tone. Emails became more careful. Meetings that used to happen without me suddenly included my name in bold at the top of the invite list. He, on the other hand, unraveled quietly. At first, he tried charm. He brought coffee into my office one morning like we were back to being a team, set it on my desk with a practiced smile. "You know," he said lightly, "we don't have to make this adversarial. We've always worked best when we trust each other." I looked at the cup, then back at him. "We can still work together," I said, "as long as we follow the contract." The smile didn't reach his eyes. Then came negotiation. He suggested amendments, revisions, clarifications. He talked fast, like speed could undo what precision had already locked in place. "You don't even like operations," he said one afternoon, pacing. "This stuff is tedious. Let me take it back off your hands." I kept my voice steady. "You should have thought about that before you wrote the clause." That's when frustration turned into resentment. He stopped coming to meetings, started undermining decisions indirectly, told people I was being overcautious, that I was overstepping, even though every step I took was legally mine to take. The difference now? People checked before believing him, because authority changes how words land. I requested a full audit. That was the moment the ground truly shifted. Accounts I'd never had access to before opened up. Subsidiaries I'd only heard about in passing appeared on my screen. Numbers began telling stories, ones that made my stomach tighten the more I read. Irregular transfers, unexplained expenses, deals made without documentation. Not illegal, not yet, but reckless, and always in his favor. I realized then why he'd been so eager to rush my signature. He wasn't just careless, he was hiding behind speed, assuming I'd stay where he was comfortable placing me, behind him. When I froze 2 transactions pending review, he lost control completely. He slammed his hand on the conference table during a leadership meeting, voice raised just enough to cross the line. "This is sabotage. You're trying to make me look bad." I didn't react. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "If transparency makes you uncomfortable, that's something you should reflect on." A few people shifted in their seats. No one defended him. After the meeting, one of the senior managers pulled me aside. "Just so you know," she said quietly, "this should have happened a long time ago." I nodded. That night, he called me. No audience, no witnesses. "You think you've won," he said coldly, "but you don't know how ugly this can get." I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening without interruption. I didn't do this to win. I did it to protect what's ours. "What's ours?" he scoffed. "You mean what you took." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I took responsibility," I said. "There's a difference." He hung up. The next morning, a formal complaint landed in my inbox, filed by him. Allegations of mismanagement, abuse of authority, breach of trust. I forwarded it to my lawyer without comment. Her response came back within the hour. "Let him file whatever he wants. The paper trail favors you." And that's when it hit me. He'd spent so long assuming I wouldn't read, wouldn't question, wouldn't act, that he never prepared for the possibility that I might. The contract wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of his exposure. Because now that I could see everything, I couldn't unsee it, and the more I uncovered, the clearer it became. He hadn't just underestimated me, he'd built his entire sense of control on the assumption that I would stay silent. That assumption was about to cost him everything. Exposure doesn't arrive all at once. It leaks. Small inconsistencies at first, questions people hadn't thought to ask before, files that didn't quite align the way they should. I didn't announce what I was doing. I didn't accuse. I let the process speak. That's the thing about systems. When you stop protecting someone inside them, they tell the truth on their own. He started showing up late, leaving early, avoiding eye contact in meetings. The man who once commanded rooms now hovered at the edges of them, watching conversations instead of leading them. And still, he tried to regain control. He sent long emails late at night, full of corporate language and emotional undercurrents, words like partnership, mutual respect, course correction. He CC'd people unnecessarily, hoping visibility would restore authority. It didn't, because authority doesn't come from being loud, it comes from being right. The audit results landed on my desk on a Monday morning. I didn't open them immediately. I closed my office door, took a breath, and reminded myself of something important. Truth doesn't require urgency, it requires steadiness. The findings were worse than I expected. Not criminal yet, but dangerously close. Conflicts of interest, side agreements, vendors tied too neatly to personal relationships, money that flowed just enough off pattern to raise concern without triggering alarms. Until now, I documented everything, carefully, neutrally, without emotion. When I called for a board review, he exploded. "This is a witch hunt," he said in front of everyone, voice shaking with anger. "You're punishing me because you don't like how I run things." I met his gaze calmly. "This isn't about liking, it's about accountability." He laughed bitterly. "You wouldn't even be here if it weren't for me." That's when something inside the room shifted. Not because of what he said, but because of how tired everyone looked hearing it. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. The board chair cleared her throat. "We'll proceed with the review," she said. "Please refrain from personal remarks." After the meeting, he followed me down the hallway. "You think this ends with you on top?" he hissed. "You think people won't turn on you next?" I stopped walking, turned, looked at him fully. "If they do," I said evenly, "it'll be because of something I did, not something I hid." He stared at me like he was trying to recognize someone he thought he knew. He couldn't, because the version of me he'd relied on, the one who deferred, trusted, stayed quiet, no longer existed. That evening, my lawyer called. "There's something else," she said. "Based on what you've uncovered, we may need to involve external oversight." I closed my eyes slowly. "Go on." She continued, "If this proceeds, he won't just lose control, he could lose his position entirely." I thanked her and hung up. I stood alone in my living room, city lights flickering outside the window, the weight of what was coming settling into my chest. I hadn't set out to destroy him. I had set out to protect myself. But sometimes, when someone builds their power on arrogance and shortcuts, protection looks like collapse. My phone buzzed with a final message from him that night. "You've crossed a line." I stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down on the table. No, he had crossed it long before I ever picked up a pen. And tomorrow, when the next meeting began, the contract he never read would finish what his arrogance had started. Because this time, there would be no way for him to talk his way out. By the time the external review was scheduled, everyone knew. Not the details, but the direction. People spoke more carefully around him. Emails included more names. Decisions that once moved quickly now paused, routed through compliance, through me. The shift wasn't dramatic, it was procedural. And procedure is unforgiving. He tried one last tactic: appeal. Not to logic, to emotion. He asked to meet after hours, just the two of us, in the conference room where we'd signed our first partnership agreement years ago. Nostalgia was his weapon of choice now. "You remember this room," he said, gesturing around like the walls might remind me of something softer. "We built everything from here." I sat across from him, hands folded. "We built some of it," I said. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're smarter than this. You know how these reviews go. They spiral. People get nervous. Mistakes get exaggerated." "Mistakes don't exaggerate themselves," I replied. His jaw tightened. "So that's it? You're just going to watch while they tear me apart?" I studied him for a moment, not with anger, not with pity, but with clarity. "I'm not watching," I said. "I'm participating, within the rules, the same rules you wrote. That clause," he began again, "you don't get to relitigate what you signed," I said calmly. "That's the whole point of contracts." Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he said the quiet part out loud. "I didn't think you'd understand it." There it was, the assumption, the foundation of everything. I stood up, gathering my bag. "That was your mistake," I said, "not mine." The review findings were delivered 2 weeks later. The board meeting was closed doors. No dramatics, no raised voices, just facts presented cleanly, unemotionally, one after another. I watched faces change as patterns became impossible to ignore. When they asked him to respond, his voice cracked, not from remorse, from disbelief. Disbelief that the system he'd manipulated now spoke without him. The decision came swiftly. He was removed from operational involvement pending further action, effective immediately. When the meeting ended, people avoided his eyes, not out of cruelty, but finality. He packed his things in silence, the office that once bent around him now indifferent to its presence. As he passed my office, he stopped. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," he said quietly. I looked up from my desk. "No," I agreed, "it's how it went." He left without another word. That evening, I sat alone, reviewing the updated organizational chart. My name sat where his once had, not as a victory, as a responsibility. I felt no rush of triumph, no satisfaction in his fall, just a steady sense of alignment, like something crooked had finally been set straight. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the city move below, unaware of the quiet transfer of power that had just taken place. The contract he never read hadn't given me power, it had revealed where it already belonged. And as the night settled in, one thought grounded itself firmly in my mind. I hadn't taken anything from him. I had simply stopped giving it back. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No shouting, no public meltdown, no dramatic confrontation in the hallway. Just absence. His chair sat empty in meetings. His name disappeared from email threads. Decisions that once required his approval moved forward without pause. The machine kept running, smoother than before, like it had been waiting for the weight to lift. That's when I understood something important. He hadn't been holding the system together. He'd been slowing it down. People adjusted quickly, too quickly. That realization landed heavier than any argument ever could. Some avoided me at first, not out of fear, but recalibration. They were learning how to speak to me without going through him, learning that my silence hadn't been ignorance, that my patience hadn't been weakness. Others leaned in. They brought ideas they'd shelved years ago, concerns they'd never felt safe voicing, questions they'd learned not to ask. And I listened, not like a conqueror, like a steward. Because authority isn't about replacing one ego with another. It's about creating space where truth doesn't have to whisper. The board scheduled a follow-up review, this time focused on long-term restructuring. I presented calmly, clearly, without dramatizing what had already been resolved. Facts, projections, accountability. When they voted to formalize my role, the decision was unanimous. No applause, no ceremony, just agreement. That night I drove home alone, hands steady on the wheel, city lights stretching out in front of me like a promise. I expected to feel something bigger, relief, vindication, triumph. Instead, I felt grounded, because the hardest part had never been the fallout, it had been the restraint. Weeks later, I received a message from him, not angry this time, not threatening, tired. "I never meant for it to end like this," he wrote. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then I typed back only 3 words. "I know." And I meant it, because intent doesn't erase impact, and ignorance doesn't undo consequences. I didn't block him, I didn't engage further. Some chapters don't need a response, they need distance. I archived the message and moved on. One evening, as I sat at my dining table reviewing quarterly reports, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. Calm, focused, different, not hardened, refined. I thought back to that first meeting, the pen sliding across the table, the impatience in his voice, the certainty that I wouldn't read what he had written, and I smiled. Not because he fell, but because I rose without announcing it. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits quietly for the moment you finally claim it, and once you do, it never needs to ask permission again. Stability has a way of revealing what chaos used to hide. Once the noise settled, I started seeing the deeper fractures, not just in the company, but in the relationships that had orbited him. Vendors who'd been loyal out of fear suddenly became cooperative. Partners who once deferred now spoke plainly. The ecosystem recalibrated itself around transparency. And with that clarity came questions. Not accusations. Curiosity. How long did you know? How did you stay so calm? Weren't you afraid? I answered honestly when asked. I trusted the process, I said, and I trusted myself. What I didn't say was how close I'd come to signing without reading, how easy it would have been to stay comfortable, to let him continue deciding for both of us while I focused on the surface of things. Comfort is seductive that way. It convinces you that avoiding conflict is the same as being safe. It isn't. One afternoon, the board chair requested a private meeting. She closed the door gently and sat across from me, hands folded. "There's something you should be aware of," she said. "He's been speaking with outside counsel." I nodded. I'd expected as much. "He believes the contract was misleading," she continued. "He may attempt to challenge its intent." Intent. The word hung between us. "Intent doesn't override language," I said calmly. She smiled faintly. "That's what counsel said as well, but these things can get unpleasant." After she left, I sat alone in the quiet of my office, sunlight spilling across the desk. I didn't feel threatened. I felt prepared. Because I hadn't relied on cleverness. I'd relied on clarity. Still, there was something else, something unsettled beneath the surface, a sense that this wasn't the final test, that his pride, once wounded, would look for a different kind of leverage. And I was right. The call came that evening from a number I didn't recognize. "Just wanted to give you a heads up," the voice said. "He's telling people you tricked him, that you set him up." I thanked them and hung up. I didn't rush to defend myself. I didn't counter the narrative, because truth doesn't chase lies. It outlasts them. The next morning, a formal notice arrived, his challenge, filed, detailed, and ultimately hollow. My legal team responded within hours, not with emotion, but with precedent. The language spoke for itself. Again. But this time, something else surfaced in the filings, an attachment he didn't mean to include. Emails, drafts, earlier versions of the contract, versions where the clause had been explained, revised, confirmed. My lawyer called me immediately. "This changes everything," she said. "He knew." I closed my eyes slowly, not in relief, in recognition. Because arrogance doesn't just blind people, it makes them careless. And in his desperation to reclaim control, he'd handed me something far more damaging than authority. He'd handed me proof. I stood by the window that night, city lights flickering below, and felt the weight of the moment settle in my chest. The story wasn't just about power anymore. It was about accountability. And the next move wouldn't be mine. It would be unavoidable. Because once truth enters the record, it doesn't leave quietly. There's a particular silence that settles in when you realize the truth no longer needs your protection. That's where I found myself. The proof sat neatly cataloged in my legal team's system. Timestamps, tracked revisions, email confirmations that made his claims collapse under their own weight. He hadn't misunderstood the clause. He hadn't been careless. He had been confident I wouldn't challenge him, and that confidence was now on display for everyone who mattered. The board convened again, this time with external counsel present. I didn't attend in person. I didn't need to. My presence would have turned it into a spectacle, and I had no interest in spectacle. What I had interest in was resolution. The call came late afternoon. "They're moving forward," my lawyer said, formally. "This isn't just about control anymore. It's about misrepresentation." I closed my laptop slowly, feeling the weight of finality press in. Not heavy, but firm. Misrepresentation meant consequences. Professional ones. Permanent ones. By evening, the rumors had escaped the building. Industry texts buzzed. Carefully worded messages arrived from people who'd once sworn loyalty to him, now eager to clarify their distance. I didn't respond. Distance clarifies itself. He tried once more to reach me that night, not with threats, not with charm, with regret. "I didn't think you'd take it this far," his message read. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, "I didn't think you'd need me to." I set my phone down and didn't pick it up again. The next morning, the announcement went out internally, measured, neutral, devastating in its simplicity. He was no longer affiliated with the organization in any capacity, effective immediately. No explanation, no defense, just fact. People stopped whispering after that, not because they were afraid, but because there was nothing left to speculate about. The story had concluded itself. Or so it seemed. That afternoon, my lawyer called again, this time with a tone I hadn't heard before. "There's interest from outside parties," she said, "questions about past deals, about oversight, about why certain things went unnoticed for so long." I leaned back in my chair, eyes closing. "Will this involve me?" I asked. "No," she said, "but your name will be mentioned." "Then let it be mentioned, accurately." I ended the call and sat in the stillness of my office, sunlight casting long shadows across the floor. I had expected this chapter to end with quiet authority, a clean transfer, a private reckoning. Instead, it was becoming something larger. Not louder, deeper. Because once one assumption falls, that a woman won't read, won't question, won't enforce, the others follow. And as the day faded into evening, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just the collapse of his control, it was the unraveling of everything he'd built on the belief that no one would ever check his work. And tomorrow, the industry would start asking questions he could no longer answer. The questions didn't come all at once. They arrived carefully, professionally, wrapped in polite language that still carried weight. Requests for clarification, invitations to discuss historical practices, gentle probes that signaled something far more serious beneath the surface. I watched it unfold from a distance, not detached, but deliberate, because when truth begins moving on its own, interference only slows it down. Industry peers who once treated him as untouchable now spoke his name with caution. Past partnerships were re-examined. Old decisions resurfaced under new scrutiny. Deals that had once been praised for speed were now questioned for substance. And through it all, my role remained unchanged. I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't correcting narratives. I wasn't explaining how I'd survived. I was running the organization, cleanly, transparently, without drama. That contrast did more than any statement ever could. One afternoon, an executive from another firm called me directly. We'd met only once before, briefly, at a conference years ago. "I just wanted to say," he began, "this transition has been impressive." "Thank you," I replied. He hesitated. "A lot of people are realizing now how much you were holding together." I smiled softly after the call ended, because that's the irony of underestimation. It erases your presence until you're the only thing left standing. The final blow came quietly, a regulatory inquiry, limited in scope, narrow in focus, but devastating in implication. My legal team handled everything. I wasn't asked to testify. I wasn't called to defend past actions. The paper trail was clean where it mattered, because I had stepped in before the damage crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, city glowing outside the windows. I thought about the woman I'd been at that conference table months ago, pen hovering, instincts whispering, unsure whether she was being paranoid or perceptive. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her this: trust the pause, trust the discomfort, trust the instinct that tells you to read what someone else wants you to rush. My phone buzzed once more, a message from a colleague. "It's over. He's done." I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because endings don't always need acknowledgement. Some lessons are complete the moment they're learned. I stood by the window and watched the city settle into night, traffic thinning, lights blinking off one by one. The world moved forward, unaware of the quiet recalibration that had taken place. He had tried to outmaneuver me with confidence. I had responded with attention, and in the end, attention had won. Because power doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who reads the fine print and knows when to act on it. Tomorrow would bring a new set of responsibilities, new challenges, new decisions. But one thing was certain now. No one would ever slide a document across a table and assume my signature was automatic again. Not ever. After everything settled, I expected quiet. Not peace, quiet. The kind where nothing new breaks, nothing unexpected surfaces, and life finally moves in a straight line. But power, once visible, attracts pressure. People who never noticed you before begin watching more closely, some with respect, others with curiosity, a few with resentment. I learned quickly to tell the difference. Invitations started coming in, panels, strategy sessions, private dinners framed as congratulations but laced with evaluation. Everyone wanted to understand how the shift had happened so cleanly, how I'd stepped into control without blood on the floor. I gave them very little. "I followed the process," I said when asked. "That's all." It was true, and incomplete. The rest didn't belong to them. Late one afternoon, as I was preparing to leave the office, my assistant hesitated at the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "No appointment." "Who?" She paused. "He says it's personal." My chest tightened, not with fear, but recognition. "I'll take it," I said. He looked different when he stepped inside. Smaller, not physically, his posture, the way his shoulders curved inward like gravity had finally found him, the confidence that once filled rooms now hovered uncertainly around him, unsure where to land. "I won't stay long," he said. "You never do," I replied. He winced, then nodded. "I just needed to see you, to understand how it all went so wrong." I studied him for a moment, the same face, the same voice, but stripped of the authority he'd worn like armor. "It didn't go wrong," I said quietly. "It went exactly as written." He laughed softly, without humor. "You know what I mean." I did. "You assumed I wouldn't read," I said. "You assumed I wouldn't act. You assumed control meant speed instead of precision." He swallowed. "I never thought you'd turn it against me." "I didn't," I said. "I turned it toward the truth." Silence settled between us, heavy and final. He nodded slowly, like he was accepting something he could no longer fight. "I guess I just wanted to say, I see you now." I held his gaze. "I always did. You just didn't believe it mattered." He left without asking forgiveness, without offering excuses, and for the first time I felt something close to closure. That night, as I locked my office and stepped into the cool evening air, I realized something unexpected. The story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about power. It was about attention. Who pays it, who avoids it, and who learns too late what ignoring it costs. As I walked toward my car, phone buzzing with another message from an unfamiliar number, one thought surfaced, steady and unshakable. This wasn't the end of the consequences. It was just the point where they stopped being mine to manage. The strangest part was how normal everything looked afterward. The same elevators, the same morning traffic, the same meetings on the calendar. From the outside, nothing appeared different. But internally, the rules had shifted, and everyone could feel it, even if they couldn't articulate how. Power had changed hands without spectacle, and that unsettled people. I noticed it in small ways, the careful phrasing of emails, the way people waited a beat longer before speaking in meetings, the sudden eagerness to document decisions that once lived comfortably in hallway conversations. Transparency does that. It forces accountability into places where comfort used to live. I didn't weaponize it. I normalized it. Policies were clarified. Oversight was strengthened. Nothing personal, nothing targeted, just systems doing what systems were always meant to do, protect the whole, not the loudest voice inside it. Still, not everyone was relieved. There were those who had benefited from his shortcuts, those who'd grown comfortable operating in the gray. They smiled, congratulated me, offered support, and watched closely. One afternoon, my lawyer called with an update. "She's officially withdrawn all challenges," she said. "No appeals, no further action." I closed my eyes briefly. "Then it's finished?" "Yes," she agreed, then paused. "For you." That pause mattered, because while I had moved on, the ripple effects were still spreading outward. Quiet investigations, internal reviews in adjacent farms, questions no one wanted traced back too far. And questions always want answers. Later that week, I received a confidential briefing, not about him, but about the past. deals approved quickly, partnerships greenlit without proper diligence. Nothing directly implicating me, but enough to remind me how close the entire structure had come to instability if I hadn't read, if I hadn't paused, if I had signed like he expected. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the drawer where I'd kept the original contract copy. The pages were creased now, corners soft from handling. I ran my fingers over the clause that had changed everything. Not because it gave me power, but because it revealed truth. I thought about how often women are told not to be difficult, not to slow things down, not to question expertise we're expected to trust blindly. I thought about how expensive that advice can be. My phone buzzed again, this time from a number I recognized. A board member. "We need to talk," the message read. "There's something new." I stared at the screen, the room suddenly very quiet. Some lessons come once, others arrive in layers. I picked up my coat, keys in hand, knowing instinctively that whatever was waiting on the other side of that conversation wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what comes next, and whether the truth I'd uncovered was finished telling its story or just getting started. The last meeting didn't feel dramatic. No raised voices, no accusations hurled across a table, just facts, timelines, and decisions made with a clarity that comes only after illusion has burned away. The board member's message had been simple, but the conversation that followed was anything but. They didn't need anything from me, not testimony, not defense, not explanation. They needed continuity, stability, leadership that didn't rely on shortcuts or ego. And I understood then what this entire journey had been preparing me for. Not power, stewardship. I accepted the expanded role without hesitation, not because I wanted more control, but because I refused to let the system fall back into the hands of someone who mistook speed for intelligence and confidence for competence. When I left the building that night, the city felt different, not louder or brighter, but clearer, like fog lifting after a long storm. I thought back to the moment that started everything, the pen sliding toward me, the impatience in his voice, the certainty that I would comply. How close I'd come to doing exactly that. Walking to my car, I realized something profound. My life didn't change the day I signed the contract. It changed the day I decided to read it. That was the moment I stopped outsourcing my authority, the moment I stopped confusing trust with surrender, the moment I understood that attention is an act of self-respect. I didn't ruin him, I didn't trap him, I didn't need revenge. He handed me the truth himself, wrapped in arrogance and sealed with assumption. All I did was open it. Today, my decisions are deliberate, my boundaries are clear, my voice no longer waits for permission to enter a room. And if there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. Power doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits quietly for the moment you choose to claim it. If you learned something new from my life story, please like this video, subscribe to join our community for more stories like mine, and comment down below where you're watching this video from. I'd truly love to know.